And I just wanted to formally introduce Christine and give you guys an idea of her background before we get started tonight. After suffering 5 compression fractures while bending down to lift up her 2-month-old daughter, Christine was diagnosed with osteoporosis when she was 42. She was a senior negotiator in the Canadian government and studied at the universities of Carleton, Queen's, and Harvard. Christine now uses her valuable skills as a passionate advocate for better bone health around the world. She is relentless at educating others on the prevention and management of this potentially debilitating disease, osteoporosis. When called upon by Osteoporosis Canada, she has lobbied to government officials and politicians to support the work of Osteoporosis Canada. Christine is also a nationally recognized author. As we all know, she's the author of Unbreakable, A Woman's Triumph Over Osteoporosis, which is endorsed by the Scientific Advisory Council of Osteoporosis Canada. And her book is available on Amazon.com. All profits go to Osteoporosis Canada. She is presently on the Osteoporosis Canada Board of Directors and has won numerous awards, the Eleanor Mills Inspiration and Backbone Awards, as well as a nomination for a Woman of Distinction Award. She is often seen in the Canadian media delivering her messages with a kind of conviction learned only through hard experience. This is a type of hard experience we can all relate to. So please give a warm welcome to one of our own, Christine Thomas.
Thank you very much, Whitney. Hi, everybody. I'm thrilled to be part of this Facebook group, and I so wished I had it 14 years ago, but it's better late than never, right? This evening, I'm going to take you on a brief journey of my life, focusing on the year 2002. So I always say, fasten your seatbelts. You're in for a bit of a bumpy ride. Tonight, I have a couple of goals. I want to share the challenges of living with fractures caused by osteoporosis. I'm going to dispel some myths about the disease, and I want to share some valuable tools available to manage your bone health and talk a little bit about my book, Unbreakable. But before I begin, I just want to say a big thank you to Whitney and her husband, Matthew, for helping make this event happen tonight. So I want to talk about how I got knocked down and then back up again. If you've ever heard the song by Chumbawamba, my friends always say when they hear it, they think of me. I'm going to talk about detecting osteoporosis, a day in the life of someone with fractures, bone health management and medications, the importance of being the captain of your own health team, what's new and lessons learned, and some next steps. So basically, I'm going to share a combination of my personal journey and how osteoporosis has affected me, as well as evidence-based research. Overall, the presentation is about building better bones, and if you each take away at least one valuable piece of information to live well with osteoporosis, I'll be happy. Some of the research I found is based on women over 40, but I still think it's relevant and important to share. And also, I don't know everyone's level of knowledge, so I'm going to start with some fundamentals and then delve into more advanced information. 14 years ago, I could look down the road and see nothing but sunshine. That was before I was struck by a disease that robbed me of everything I'd taken for granted, a disease I never even saw coming. I was climbing the ladder of success in the federal government. I had completed my executive MBA, and my husband and I were anticipating the birth of our first child together with enthusiasm and cautious optimism. At 42, I'd had 3 previous miscarriages, but I was determined to give birth to a healthy baby, so I followed doctor's orders scrupulously. In September 2001, my daughter was born, 8.5 pounds of good health. Now my daughter Chanel is 14 and is still energetic and very fit. My own story was darker. Because of a high-risk pregnancy, basically placenta previa, I spent 8 weeks on bed rest in what I call the most expensive hotel in Ottawa, the Ottawa Hospital Civic Campus. I'd also been put on blood thinners, and both the bed rest and the meds proved devastating and robbing me of bone density. But there's no doubt in hindsight that I went into the pregnancy with poor bone health but didn't know it. The first punch came when I was bending over the crib one night when my daughter was about 8 weeks old, and I felt a jolt of pain in my spine that nearly caused me to pass out. Luckily, my husband was there to catch me from falling. And then the second one was a minor fall in the home, and the pain was relentless and unbearable. So after a trip to emergency and a follow-up with my physician, she called me at home and said, "Chris, I don't know how to tell you, but you have 5 spinal fractures in your lower spine and severe osteoporosis." So as you can imagine, like many of you, I was devastated, especially being a new mother. So what helped me understand the disease? Learning about a couple of concepts, namely peak bone mass and the bone remodeling process, was very helpful to me, and some great visuals made it all come together. So what is osteoporosis? To me, the picture says it all. You probably all know it's abnormal bone loss. But it doesn't just affect the quantity of your bone, it affects the quality of the bone. And many people don't know that. It affects the struts, the microarchitecture. If you look at the visual on the left, the microarchitecture is thick and dense and strong. The one on the right is very web-like. So, and your bone quality, and not just the bone density, but the bone quality, it includes characteristics such as flexibility, your ability to bear a load, and your resistance to fracture. So it's important not to just look at your bone mineral density, but in order to look at your strength, you want to look at bone quality and bone mineral density. Unfortunately, though, there's no test like the BMD to assess your bone quality, but there are things that they can look at. So I'm going to come back to this point later on. So one concept that I think is important to understand is peak bone mass. That's when your skeleton reaches its maximum strength and density. It's about age 20 for boys and about 16 for women. And basically with your peak bone mass, you're spending the first 20 years of your life building your bone's foundation. And what affects your peak bone mass, or what influences it, is your genetics, affects it about 80%, whether you're male or female, your nutrition growing up, particularly calcium and vitamin D, and physical activity and other lifestyle factors. The other important concept is something called the bone remodeling process. When we're not in the healthcare system, we tend to, if we're not a professional in the healthcare system, we tend to take our bones for granted and even think of them as unchanging, more like rock as opposed to supple skin. But in fact, bones are made of living cells, and they're constantly in the process of construction and demolition. And healthy bone is always renewing itself. Where you have the osteoclasts that come in and they dig pits in the bone surface. When they're finished their job, the osteoblasts come in and fill in those pits surface. So bone mass is maintained when both of those processes are in balance. However, there's a shift in the dynamics of that process as we get older, or if we have osteoporosis. It's almost like the block in the middle, where the osteoclasts are working faster than the osteoblast can come in and repair the bone. Now you can have, if we take a look at our bones as a bank account, about at the ages of about 0 to 20, we're making more deposits than withdrawals. Between the age of 20 to 30, deposits equal withdrawals. After the age of 30, the withdrawals exceed deposits. So if you go into that with a really strong optimal peak bone mass, you're at less risk than somebody who does not. And menopause, as we know, is very mean to the bones because of the drop in estrogen. Estrogen protects the bones. So if you have a substantial amount in your peak bone bank, a high peak bone mass, prior to the surge or withdrawals, then all's well. If not, you can run into overdrafts. So the two key factors are, when you're younger, you want to get that peak bone mass to achieve the optimal, and as you get older, you want to slow the rate of bone loss. You can have 2 women, just to give you an example. One, she may have a normal peak bone mass. However, she has poor diet, poor exercise, when she's younger, and she may only achieve 80% of her optimal peak bone mass. So she may be at risk for osteoporosis. Then somebody else takes care of themselves, good nutrition, good exercise, etc. However, she's genetically predisposed to the condition, so she too may be at risk for osteoporosis, particularly after menopause. So how do we assess bone health? In Canada, we have an organization which I am a volunteer with called Osteoporosis Canada. And it has a scientific advisory council made up of experts from across Canada who have reviewed all of the research and come up for the guidelines on how to assess and manage osteoporosis in Canada. And these guidelines are given to physicians and other experts in the field. And the gold standard is still the bone mineral density test. And they're saying who should have a BMD test? All women and men over 65, women and men 50 to 64 with certain risk factors, and people under the age of 50 with a disease or condition associated with bone loss, which would be our group, originally when I was 42 at the time. So, many people that have a bone mineral density test, friends that I have, call me and they say, okay, now I've got the test, but they really don't know what it means. The bone densitometer measures the transmission of small amounts of light that pass through your bones. It's like light shining through a curtain. If you have a sheer fabric curtain, a great deal of light passes through. If you have a heavy, dense fabric, very little light passes through. And it's the same for your bones. The thinner the bones, the more likely the X-ray is going to pass through it. And a BMD measures the grams of calcium and other bone minerals that are packed into a segment of bone. The higher the content, the denser the bone. The denser the bone, the stronger they're likely to be, and the less likely they are to break. And then your bone density is compared to that of a healthy young adult. And that's how they get the T-scores. But one thing I wanted to note, which I have learned through my BMDs, is if you have had a vertebral fracture, it has an impact, and it can have an impact and give false high results. To give you an example, let's say they look at L1, 2, 3, and 4. And L1, L2, and L4 have pretty well the same reading. But all of a sudden, L3 is really high. They'll probably take a look at L3 to see if there's a compression fracture, because if there is a compression fracture, it can alter the score and give it a false higher reading. So it's something just to take into consideration. The other thing I highly recommend, which I do, is to ask for copies of your bone mineral density report so that you can take it home and file it and review it and take note of it over the years. In other words, to do your own homework. So in Canada, people 50 to 64 with risk factors that should have a bone mineral density test. So what are those risk factors? Have you had a fracture after the age of 40? And what they mean, of course, by a fragility fracture is by standing height or less. Someone may fall, trip in the home, they brace themselves with their wrists. Someone with healthy bones may bruise. Someone with osteoporosis may break one or more wrists. So it's from standing height or less, low trauma. High-risk medications, people that are on glucocorticoid steroids, a lot of other medications I list in my book, but then they're online as well, is drugs, some drugs for heartburn, some antidepressants. There's a list of medications that can have an impact on the bone building process, and sometimes people don't know it. Some chemotherapies. So it's almost a side effect of what else is going on. It's like a secondary osteoporosis. Has your mother or father had a hip fracture? Sometimes people have a chest x-ray and it's revealed that they have a compression fracture, because some people can feel their compression fractures and some people have no pain. Smoking is a risk factor for osteoporosis. High alcohol intake, 3 or more alcoholic beverages a day. Low body weight, under about 125 pounds, and rheumatoid arthritis or some other disorders such as celiac. So in addition to what I was saying, what else physicians should do is they should do a physical examination. And some key warning signs for a vertebral fracture, of course, are height loss. If somebody's lost more than 2 centimeters in height since their last visit, or 6 centimeters in height since the tallest they remember being, is definitely a warning sign for osteoporosis and a compression fracture. For example, for myself, I used to be 5 foot 5 inches and now I'm 5'2", so I'm lost 3 inches in height. Now, there's something you may or may not heard of because I think most of you are under the age of 30, but what they have learned over the years, bone mineral density test is still the gold standard, but it used to be almost the sole tool used to determine somebody's bone health. And they're realizing now this is only one piece of the puzzle. It is not enough. That you'll have to look at other factors to look at people's risk of breaking a bone. So now in Canada and other countries, they use something called FRAX, and you can Google it, and you can Google it for your own particular country. And what they ask for is your BMD, your weight, your height, has a parent had a fracture, etc. And what comes out is your risk of breaking a bone. Now, the data used for FRAX, though, is data used for people something like 40 to 90. So if you're under the age of 40, it calculates it based on the age of 40 because they don't have enough data on younger people, unfortunately. But it's still, I wanted to share that the tool is there, and it may be something that you want to look at so that you can take a look at it sometime. Now, what comes out of that, as I mentioned, they don't just look at BMD anymore. Out of this formula, what it's supposed to tell the physician is the person at low, moderate, or high risk of fracture? So it's not so much, do you have osteopenia, do you have osteoporosis? It's what's the risk of the person breaking a bone, because that's the most important thing that affects quality of life. So what are the top 3 broken bone sites? Many of you may know. The wrist, the spine, and hip. Those are the statistically. There are other fractures, but those are the most common. So why the emphasis on fracture? As many of you may know, because once you've had a fracture, your chance of a future fracture goes up. So if you have osteoporosis, you want to do everything you can to prevent the first fracture. Once you've fractured, like myself and many of you, you want to do everything you can to prevent the cascade of future fractures. So again, much about, do you have osteoporosis? It's what is your risk of breaking a bone? In Canada, how likely are we to break a bone? It's 1 in 3 women suffer an osteoporotic fracture in their lifetime. And osteoporotic fractures are more common than heart attack, stroke, and breast cancer combined. In terms of men, which many people don't know that men can be affected, 1 in 5 men will suffer an osteoporotic fracture in their lifetime. So what does a spinal fracture look like? Many people have asked me this, so I found this visual. I don't know if I'm pronouncing it right, but Fatima posted the different types of fractures on the Facebook page, on the Facebook group, and I think that is also helpful. If you look at the vertebrae at the top, there's a full square rectangular healthy vertebrae, and right under it you have one that is concave that has a fracture. So in other words, it has altered the shape of the spine. So even though we exercise and take medication and good nutrition, after that, the shape of the spine is altered. So what we want to do is we want to do everything we can when we're physically able to do stretches and exercises to support the spine to prevent the cascade of future fractures. Now, enough about broken bones. Let's talk about bone health management and how we can move forward. The 3 building blocks for bone management, according to Osteoporosis Canada, are calcium, vitamin D, and exercise. Now, these recommendations are for ages 19 to 50. They recommend calcium 1,000 milligrams a day, no more than 500 milligrams in the form of a supplement. Vitamin D, 400 to 1,000 units, and exercise, exercise, exercise. And I wanted to share a link that takes you to the Osteoporosis Canada site that has both videos and a booklet on gentle stretches that are good for people that are trying to regain their bone health. Now, you get about 300 milligrams of calcium just by throughout your diet. You can even get a little bit through bread, etc. But some ways to get 300 milligrams are any of the following. It could be a cup of milk, a cup of fortified soy if you can't do dairy, fortified orange juice, yogurt, salmon. There's a number of things that you can look up online. But the reason why they promote dairy so much is because it's the most efficient. I don't want to get into the debate about dairy or non-dairy. It's the easiest thing for me. I happen to like Starbucks, and I drink my venti non-fat caramel macchiato every day and get 16 ounces of milk, and that's my story, and I'm sticking to it. And anyway, it's the easiest way for me. You have to have, for example, a lot of broccoli in order to supplement to get 300 milligrams, and I'll explain that in just a second. Now, and if you can't get it through nutrition, you can go through the avenue of supplementation. Now, the issue of supplements, if you think of it logically, wherever possible, you should try and get your calcium through your nutrition. When you do so, you do throw sporadically throughout the day. You may have a milk with your cereal, you may have yogurt at lunch, you may have cheese later on in the day. In other words, the calcium is entering your bloodstream throughout the day. What has happened in some research, they've seen that people have over-supplemented and they have these huge spikes of calcium in their bloodstream at one time, which is not good. Particularly for people that are older, it can lead to heart attack and stroke. So it's just be conscious that if you're taking supplements with calcium, to do so a little bit at a time and not all at once in smaller doses. Now, just to give you an example, one thing that I learned is that the amount of calcium you absorb from the food you eat depends not only on the elemental calcium, but in other words, how easily it's absorbed, something called bioavailability. So with something like broccoli, it has 20 milligrams of calcium. However, only 60% of that is available or bioavailable to your system. So you'd have to have about 6 cups of broccoli to equal 1 cup of milk. So although it's good to have broccoli, when you have it, don't think, oh, gee, I'm getting 300 milligrams of calcium. The other thing I wanted to mention was magnesium, because it's come up in the Facebook group. In Canada, they don't recommend they don't see the need for a magnesium supplement. They feel that there's enough in the diet, and they don't think it is essential to have a supplement to help you absorb the calcium. Now, true or false, vitamin D is not necessary for calcium to be absorbed in the body. It's false. Vitamin D is necessary for calcium to be absorbed in the body, as it aids in the absorption of calcium from the small intestine, and it also helps maintain blood calcium levels. Vitamin D is also needed for bone growth, bone remodeling. Your osteoblasts and your osteoclasts need it. Our muscles need it to move. Our nerves need it to carry messages between the brain and every body part. And the immune system needs it to fight off bacteria and viruses. So it's really important. And where we are in Canada, we do not get enough sunlight. And where we're geographically located, we're vitamin D deficient. Many people have a sedentary lifestyle, so it's really important that we have vitamin D supplements. But again, I encourage you with both calcium and vitamin D to talk to your healthcare provider about what is suitable for you. A cup of milk has about 100 international units. Yogurt has about 50, and salmon has about 250, and we need at least a minimum of 400. Now I want to talk a little bit about exercise and movement. Sorry, just to go back here. People with osteoporosis and risk of developing it, walking is not enough. It's not enough in terms of exercise. Our exercise routines, we need strength training, balance training, weight bearing, and posture training. And the benefits are improvement in muscle mass, strength, fall prevention, reducing risk of fractures, and slowing the rate of bone loss. And if you've had a fracture, and I know many of you have, it's really important that you be aware of your risk for a future fracture before you start any exercises. Make sure you talk to your physician or get an exercise specialist that understands the disease. And I caution you with both Pilates and yoga. There's a lot of, I know there was a posting of, the recommendation of yoga, and a lot of people use it to prevent osteoporosis. If you're going to join a yoga class, be very careful that you're not doing forward flexion, bending, twisting, or any of that if you've had a spinal fracture. For myself, I can't do any of that anymore. The only thing I can do is really chair yoga exercises or things like the tree and stuff like that. I can't do anything that will cause forward flexion in the spine. It's too risky. Now, what's weight resistance exercise? It's basically strength training to improve the muscle strength, and it can help increase your bone mineral density. For example, a tennis player, the arm that they use to play tennis, that will have a higher bone density than the other arm that they do not use. So strength and resistance are really important. It can be involved moving objects or your own body weight to create resistance. Some example are barbells, dumbbells, household objects like cans, wrist weights, resistance bands. I personally use resistance bands because they have a greater benefit. They use more muscles, and I have less chance of injury, and I don't even have to go to a gym to do it. I can just do it in my own home. If you're going to use, equipment in a gym, which I do, just be very careful again that you're taught how to do it correctly so that there's no injury, and that you start very gently, particularly after fracture. And there's certain equipment that you shouldn't use, with that forward flexion. Swimming is also good. It is not bone building, but can also help strengthen the muscles in the spine. Posture and balance training are really important. As you know, osteoporosis can be very nasty to the posture. Gentle exercises to improve posture are great. One of the key concepts is body mechanics and posture alignment. It refers to the relationship of the head, shoulders, spine, and hips to one another, and I can't demonstrate that as I normally do. But it's just important to note your head weighs about 5 kilograms or about 10 pounds. So when you're slumped over, at your computer, that's tremendous harm and pressure on the spine, bending forward like that. So you want to be really conscious of that. And core and abdominal strength training is important as well. As I mentioned, you just have to be careful, again, no bending or twisting of the spine. The other key activity that's important is weight-bearing activities. It could be walking, running, dancing, badminton, tennis, basketball. What works for me is I use the elliptical and I use a treadmill, because walking is not that comfortable for me at a good pace, so I prefer to do it on a treadmill or an elliptical. I also swim and cycle. Now I want to talk briefly about the impact of my spinal fractures, and I thought it would be helpful to talk about the impact on my life in 3 areas: the impact physically, emotionally, and financially. This is a visual that I received permission to use from one of the newspapers in Ottawa. We all know that living with osteoporosis is one thing. Living with fractures caused by the disease, as many you know, is the challenging part. So let's look at the possible physical consequences: loss of height, As I shared earlier, I've lost about 3 inches in height, which can't, for me, it was in the lower spine. For some people, it's in the upper spine, which can cause kyphosis, the curvature of the spine. There can be loss of flexibility. What happens sometimes with multiple compression fractures is it puts pressure on the organs inside, which they have no space to go, so it forces them out a bit. So there's a bit of a protruding stomach. There can be heartburn, neurological damage, and in some severe cases of senior people, difficulty breathing if they continue to fracture. So when I lobby to the governments for money for research, etc., and to support medications, we share that this is not a cosmetic issue, it's a serious health issue. So for me, I was pretty much a mess for a long time. It took me a year to get a version of my life back. I had more than 50 appointments in 18 months, which included physiotherapy, occupational therapy, physician, endocrinologist, an orthopedic surgeon, x-rays, blood work. And I share this in many of my seminars with people that do not have osteoporosis so that they understand that it can have consequences on a person's quality of life as well as their families. The smallest action put me at risk for further fractures. My husband had to help me shower and dress. I couldn't care for my daughter or even lift her, so we had to hire a caregiver. And I had lost so much muscle mass, I couldn't even lift, a kettle of water. The pain was relentless, and I learned a lot about chronic pain, that for some people it can rob you blind. It can take away their marriage, their friends, your favorite pastimes, big chunks of your personality. I'm a pretty fun person, but I wasn't fun back then. All I wanted to do was stay in bed. It was the least painful position, which, as you know, causes further bone loss and muscle loss. You don't get any of those natural endorphins. My one and only child was bonding with her caregiver, and that was because of my inability to care for her, and that was extremely hard. It was very dark and cold, and I couldn't get out. I didn't want to get outside. I felt trapped. It was a downward spiral, a lot of self-pity, and I had lost my appetite. And it wasn't until 2 doctors approached me one-on-one and suggested that I take an antidepressant. I gave it some thought, and my research reveals many people diagnosed with fractures from osteoporosis experience depression in the short or long term. So I encourage all of them to talk to their doctors about options to deal with that with or without medication. Life demands choices, and I made the choice to take the antidepressant for a period of time to help me get back into the game of life. I remember all I wanted for Christmas was a healthy back, and instead I got a back brace, a shower bar, and a railing for the front steps. So what was my survival kit? At first, I just wanted to spend time in bed, longer in the morning, more naps in the afternoon, and going to bed earlier. I was in a cycle. And I took pain medication. As I mentioned, I took the antidepressant. I had a walker, and then I moved to a cane. I had a back brace for a period of time, but when I went to the endocrinologist, he wasn't that happy about it because he was afraid I would be losing more muscle. So if you use a back brace, I talk about it in the book, but you have to be careful that you manage that and gradually wean yourself off it. But it can be helpful in the acute stages when the pain is bad. I had a shower bar. I remember I couldn't brush my teeth or eat dinner without holding on to a counter because I had lost so much muscle. And I remember coughing and sneezing were just about unbearable, that I've learned that you really have to brace yourself, depending on where your fractures are, when you cough or sneeze. My doctor recommended an outstanding physiotherapist, and she was my lifeline. She helped me begin my journey to recovery. And she started off with hydrotherapy in the hospital, where it's basically physiotherapy in water, and you stand up in a large tub to do gentle exercises. And I took baby steps, slowly, gradually, exercises and stretches. And then we bought a used treadmill, and I used that, and I got on it every day, whether I wanted to or not. And let me tell you, there were days where I didn't want to, but I did, little by little. I couldn't lift my daughter for a year, and she learned very early on to climb into my lap. So let's take a look for a minute at my routine. Most people don't think twice about jumping out of bed in the morning, but I, on the other hand, have a set routine where I do something called the log roll. Now, Lucy Marciani posted a video of this on the Facebook group, and I thought that was great. And where you pull in your knees, tighten the abdomen, roll to the side, and then get up gently. And this prevents pain and injury. I exercise and stretch 5 days a week, including the weight bearing, the strength training, the posture, etc. I go for a tune-up with my physiotherapist, who's now certified in osteopathy. I go about once or twice a month, or I go more frequently if I've twisted or turned or I've hurt something. It affects all my daily activities in terms of body mechanics. We have to be careful of how we're reaching to get something, bending over even in to pick out something out of the laundry, avoiding twisting and flexion. It's really important to be conscious of body mechanics. My daughter and husband and I love to travel, and I have to be very mindful of my fractures. One year, when my daughter was in elementary school, I went to I volunteered with her class to go on a bus trip. And we got on the school bus, and I was at the back of the bus, and the bus hit a pothole, and all the kids went flying, and they thought it was hilarious, except me. It was jarring to my spine and very painful. Never even thought of it. So I have to be conscious of stuff like that. It's altered much of our furniture. Bye-bye butter soft leather couch. I need firm seats, firm mattresses. Can't sit in a sports car with V-shaped seats. I need a smooth ride. Everything has to be ergonomic. So when we make purchase decisions, we have to take into consideration my back. So back to my journey. I'm 56 years old, which totals about 29 million minutes. When I began my journey to recovery, I used to watch Dr. Phil. I'd get on the treadmill when my daughter was napping, and he talked about traumatic events that change our approach to life. And getting that phone call from my doctor telling me I had 5 spinal fractures, namely T11, T12, and L1, 2, and 3. Getting that phone call was a defining moment for me. There was no quick fix. I just wanted to take Tylenol, go to bed, and wake up, and everything would be fine, and that wasn't the case. I had friends helping for about 2 weeks and realized that it was not going to be a quick fix. And so how was I going to deal with all of this? Well, that was then, and this is now. I knew I had to start my journey of recovery and get back into the game of life. After about 8 months, the fractures started healing. The pain became more manageable. I graduated from a walker to a cane to my own 2 feet. I set goals and celebrated my successes. And today at 56, I can say that I managed the disease instead of letting it manage me. I don't normally divulge my age, but someone in Ottawa she wrote an article in a newspaper here in Ottawa, and she did such a good job. It was picked up by newspapers across Canada, and it was my story. And so I figured my age is out there now, so I tell people. So be it. I manage my physical health with, as I mentioned, physiotherapy is my lifeline. And the right individual can not only help you build bone and muscle, but confidence to take on daily activities. I exercise religiously, drink milk, and I make sure I get enough calcium and vitamin D. I've been on medication since 2002. And I've also learned that emotional scars can run deep when diagnosed with osteoporosis or any chronic condition. So when you're treating osteoporosis, you have to mend the mind, body, and soul. I have tools to turn around my mood, progressive muscle relaxation, meditation, incantations. There's apps now called Mind Shift. You can have short bursts of meditation. I truly believe in that mind-body connection. I had lost so much muscle mass that when my physiotherapist started working with me, my muscles wouldn't respond. I had to use a TENS machine, and she had to really get me to focus mentally on a particular muscle to get it to fire again, to get it to work again. I also, one year my husband said, "What do you want for Christmas?" I said, "An image consultant." I found the fractures had affected my figure, which it had affected my self-esteem. So I spoke to somebody, and she was really helpful at helping me alter my wardrobe. And I have some tips in the book about that. And one very simple one, for example, is, let's say you wear black pants and a black top. In other words, one color coordinating from top to bottom, which gives you an elongated, or gives you a sense of more height visually than if, let's say, you wear black pants and a white top, if you're trying to increase your height and less focus on the abdomen. It's hard to explain this just verbally, but I think you get it. So this is why I'm unbreakable. Osteoporosis broke my spine, but it didn't break my spirit. My daughter is now 14. Now I wanted to talk a little bit about stress and your thoughts and the impact on your body. I was a keynote speaker recently and at an event outside of my city and in Peterborough, and there was a psychotherapist by the name of Julie Brown. She's a mental health clinician, and she shared some really helpful tips that I thought I'd pass on. Quickly, I just wanted to compare animals to humans for a minute with respect to something called the fight or flight response. When a lion sees a zebra in the distance and the zebra hears a lion, both go into fight or flight for survival. So let's assume the zebra is lucky and is able to get away from the lion. After the incident, they both move out of fight or flight response. And in other words, animals move in and out of it rapidly. A lion attack from start to finish is about 45 seconds. In this case, he failed, but the point is that that's how long the animal's stress response, and our stress response, is designed to be activated, for seconds, not hours or days or even weeks on end like some of us do, because we don't know how to turn it off. What happens with some people is they move into stress response and stay there, fight, flight, and freeze. We replay something over and over and over again. Been there, done that. And the stress comes from our thoughts about the circumstances and the event. We speculate about things that may never happen. For example, we may go to a doctor's appointment and come home and say, "I can't believe that doctor made me wait so long today for my appointment. Did she think I had nothing better to do? Didn't she even know she didn't even know what she was talking about. I like this, I hated that," and it's like a runaway train as you toss and turn in the middle of the night. So when you find yourself doing this, this woman, Julie Brown, suggested stop and say, "Okay, I'm in my stress response. What do I need?" Stop, take a breath, rebalance. It's simple but not easy, but it's effective because it engages our thinking brain and brings us back online. Our mind wanders, so we have to name it to tame it and practice gratitude daily for even simple baby steps forward. I was extremely angry after my fractures. I spent 8 weeks in hospital on bed rest with this outstanding team of professionals. And I'm thinking, how did I slip through the healthcare system and how come I fractured? I was very, very angry and I had to learn to let go of that. But sometimes you just have to vent, right? And Anne-Marie did that. Anne-Marie Scorgi did that with the blank this disease this week. And sometimes you just got to do that. And this Facebook group gives us a soft place to land. So I wanted to talk a little bit now about looking beyond BMD. Many people like myself that are still at risk for breaking a bone have to take medication. We don't want to, but we have to, because calcium, vitamin D, and exercise are not enough. And the decision to prescribe medication by health professionals, they look at your risk of breaking a bone. They look at your BMD results, your age, your sex, whether you've had a fracture before, and other risk factors. So I want to talk a little bit about treatment options. These are treatments that are approved in Canada. Bisphosphonates are the first, and you may know them as other names, some called Fosamax, Actonel, and Aclasta is an annual infusion of a bisphosphonate. Basically, they slow down the bone-eroding cells. They bind to the surfaces of bones, and they slow down the bone-resorbing action of the osteoclasts. So what it does is it allows the osteoblasts, the bone-building cells, to work more effectively. Denosumab, which is more recent, Prolia, inhibits the development of cells that eat away bone. So they inhibit the development of the osteoclasts, thereby increasing BMD. Then we have the parathyroid hormone, Forteo, which is a daily injection. It is the only drug that actually activates bone-building cells. You can be on it for a maximum of 2 years in Canada, and it's roughly $800 to $1,000. The cost is roughly $800 to $1,000 a month. I've been on all of these bone-building medications over the years. I started with bisphosphonates, taking orally by pill, which worked for me in terms of improving my bone mineral density. However, after time, I developed heartburn. So I switched off of that and I went to Forteo, the daily injection. I had additional insurance, so I was able to do that for 2 years. After that, I went to Aclasta, which is the annual infusion, and now I am on Prolia, which is 2 injections per year. Now, what I wanted to share is going back to the bone quality and bone quantity. What happens sometimes, the research is showing that even though the BMD does not go up, your quality of your bone may be improving when you are on treatment. So in other words, your treatment may reduce your fracture risk, even though there is not significant improvement in the BMD. Now, what's the good and bad about bisphosphonates? And again, this research is on people over the age of 40, because the population that we're dealing with pregnancy-related osteoporosis is a much smaller population. Well, the good side is it increases BMD, it increases bone strength, and lowers the risk of fracture. Rare but serious possible side effects are osteochondrosis of the jaw, which is 1 in 10,000 to 1 in 100,000. Basically what happens is, let's say someone goes in to have a tooth extraction, it's delayed healing. It's like an open wound, and it's smokers are at a much higher risk. So the bottom line, it's delayed healing. Another rare but serious possible side effect is an atypical fracture. This is not a regular osteoporotic fracture of the hip, it's in the lower thigh. It's a stress or fatigue fracture that happens over time. And so the risk, the longer that you're on the bisphosphonate, the greater the risk for these. And the other was kidney injury, only with the intravenous of Aclasta. But I think what had happened is they needed to take blood work of people to see the health of the kidney before the infusion, and also too, they've completely slowed down the rate of the infusion. The other thing I wanted to mention, there's a doctor by the name of Dr. Frank Rauch, R-A-U-C-H, who does a lot of research in Canada and worldwide on medications for children that have bone health issues, such as osteogenesis imperfecta and other. So some of these bisphosphonates are used by children as well as other medications. Now, where the concept of drug holiday came about, again, this is mainly for older people, but I think it's important to share. It's not because drugs stop working after 5 years. They work as long as you take them. It's because of concerns regarding the risk of atypical fractures. So if you're at low risk, there's no need to take a medication. If you're at moderate risk, then they suggest you take a bisphosphonate for 5 to 7 years, and then after that, assess whether it's really necessary. If you're at high risk, especially if you've had a recent fracture, it's not ideal to stop the bisphosphonates, but they may change you to a different therapy such as Prolia or Forteo. And this is a very recent slide that Dr. Suzanne Morin, someone from the Scientific Advisory Council, just came out with. So it's really a personal decision that you have to work out with your healthcare professionals. The benefits of medication are to reduce fracture, improve quality of life, and for elderly people to reduce mortality. The risks of not taking medication for some people, fractures beget more fractures, which reduces quality of life. And for senior people, it can increase mortality, especially with a hip fracture. But the rare but serious side effects are ONJ and atypical fracture. So, what do we need to do to build better bones? It's important to know your risk factors for a future fracture, getting regular bone mineral density tests, getting on your feet and getting moving, getting stronger, eating the right stuff, reporting fractures and falls, and a big thing is to listen to your body. You know your body better than anyone else. You know, a medication may work for one person, may not work for another. Someone may have side effects, someone else may not. When I was originally suffering from a lot of back pain, I had not yet had a diagnosis, and I went to some physio who she was very incompetent. I left in more pain. There was no real diagnosis, and I did not listen to my body, and I left there in a lot more pain than when I arrived, and I didn't trust my instincts. I kept going back thinking that she could fix me, and it was the wrong thing to do. So I'm more conscious of that. I had an orthopedic surgeon when I was in the hospital who was abrupt, unsympathetic, downright nasty. And I know other people have had to experience that. And it's very difficult. You know, he didn't know how to deal with someone my age who had osteoporosis. It wasn't until I saw an endocrinologist who said, gee, you know, you've been through a rough time. And I finally thought, someone gets this. Someone understands what I'm going through. The one other thing I wanted to talk about very briefly is breastfeeding, because it's come up on the Facebook group. I wanted to share that I chose to stop. My back pain was debilitating and I could not function. We decided it was the best thing to do. As women and mothers, we tend to put a lot of pressure on ourselves. And I remember my mom saying, Chris, why don't you stop breastfeeding and start bottle feeding? And I immediately took offense and thought, why does she not support me on this? And it wasn't until after that I saw that she said it out of love, as she saw how much I was suffering trying to do it all while in so much pain. So I decided to stop breastfeeding. And it took me about 72 hours to get used to the decision. But I realized it was the best thing for me and my daughter. She wasn't getting enough milk, and I really had to focus on me and getting well. But again, it's a personal decision, no judgment. I highly recommend, first things first, that you take an active role in maintaining your own well-being. I have an awesome healthcare team, but I want to be the coach, I want to be the quarterback, and I want to be part of the decisions affecting my body. And I know many of you do as well. I tried to keep my sense of humor even when it was rough. I remember my GP asking me what my method of birth control was. This was right after my fractures. And I said, my method of birth control is fractures. Like, what the heck? Who has a sex life in the acute stages of spinal fractures? Like, give your head a shake. I recommend you do your homework. You come to appointments prepared with your top 3 questions. I have a checklist in my book. You know, bring someone with you if you can, because it can be overwhelming. Research shows that doctors spend about 2 minutes listening and the rest of the time they talk. So you want to be really, really prepared before you go into that appointment. And no one has all the answers. You have to trust yourself. You know, you see a doctor for about 20 minutes and the rest of the time you're on your own. So I recommend something called the Canadian Osteoporosis Patient Network, which I'll talk a little bit about in a minute. The other thing you can do, like Kim Martin did, you know, once you're strong enough, tell your story. You know, raise awareness either quietly or loudly, whatever works for you. And my other note that I have that I just remembered is be really good to those receptionists in the your physician's office. They are the gatekeepers. Pamper them and be kind to them because they can make or break your getting into your appointment. So some of the tools that I wanted to share. There's one called the Canadian Osteoporosis Patient Network. It is free, and I highly recommend that you join it. You may think, oh, that's for older people, but you know what? There's a wealth of information. There's online seminars about medications, treatment, exercise, you name it, that's updated. You can watch the archived ones in your own home, in your jammies if you want. It's great free advice, and I highly recommend it. So I've got the link for you there. In Canada, we have something called BoneFit. So if you live a city in Canada, you can click on it and they can tell you where there is people that have been certified to guide you through an exercise program, because you want to make sure you get a trainer or physiotherapist that understands fractures and osteoporosis. Also, there's a booklet online called Too Fit to Fracture and videos. So again, it's a great place to get some exercises. And also what Osteoporosis Canada has is position statements by their Scientific Advisory Council. You know, I get people sending me stuff. Oh, Chris, try coconut water and try this and try. It has to be evidence-based research to support it. And that's what I want to see. And so when these things get thrown out in the media, the Scientific Advisory Council respond to what the evidence shows. So what are my lessons learned? Our healthcare system has fractures. Fewer than 20% of fracture patients are offered screening and or treatment for their underlying osteoporosis after they've fractured. And this is in sharp contrast to the rate of treatment after a heart attack. About 80% of people receive beta blockers, and I've witnessed this. I have 3 sisters, and one of them had a heart attack a number of years ago. And when I went in to see her frequently, while she was in hospital, she got a guide on an actual booklet on a healthy heart. We joined her in free seminars to learn about heart health, nutrition, exercise. There was library, full resources, and an exercise facility. When I had my spinal fractures and was hospitalized, I asked the orthopedic surgeon what to do, and he said, put on a back brace and carry on. No medication, no guides, no information, no exercise recommendations, absolutely nothing. And to me, that's not acceptable, that we should have the same level of care. It's not acceptable to me that what happens is, you know, women and men over the age of 50, let's say, present themselves at emergency with a wrist fracture, and they get a cast and then end up going home, and then they fracture. They come back for repeat business 10 years later because they've never been captured by their physician in terms of their assessing their bone health. So you can see why those with pregnancy-related osteoporosis and fractures don't get much attention, because they're an even smaller population. It's both osteoporosis is just not on people's radar. So what are we doing to change that? You will see the International Osteoporosis Foundation and many of the other organizations across the world are moving to something called fracture liaison service, whereby somebody comes in, let's say over 50, they fracture their wrist, they go into emergency. When they come back to get their cast off, they flag them. A nurse practitioner will identify them, they'll give them a bone mineral density test, they'll assess their risk for fracture, and if necessary, give them treatment, and then send all the information to their healthcare professional, their physician. So the idea is we want to close the gap, reduce the risk of fracture, and reduce healthcare costs. So what am I determined to do now besides pay close attention to my own bone health is to get the word out there. Osteoporosis is a big deal. It has serious long-term ramifications, both individually and socially, and it's often discovered, like many of us, after we've broken a bone. We don't know it beforehand. But bones, even declining ones, can be kept healthy. To me, the first step is awareness. People just don't think osteoporosis is going to happen to them. They think I'll worry about it when I'm 70 or 80 or even 90. And we're here to say that, waiting's not an option. So I have a mission to create an epidemic that begins in Ontario and spreads across Canada and now the world, to educate men and women about the significance of building bone, regardless of age, so that we can someday eliminate something like 1 million fractures that occur around the world each year. Oops. Now, just lastly, I wanted to just talk very briefly about my book, Unbreakable. I wrote it and talk about my journey to dispel myths and encourage people to take care of their bones. When I was diagnosed, there was no books out there that were helpful to me. They were more from a doctor's perspective and not the patient perspective. So mine has both evidence-based research as well as my personal journey. And I found many of them were missing information on things like pain management and the emotional side of the disease. So it is available on Amazon.com, and all the money goes to Osteoporosis Canada. So in closing, I just want to leave you with this quote from Margaret Mead. Never doubt that a group of dedicated individuals can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has. And I firmly believe that this Facebook group will have an impact on the world and this disease. So what I'll do now is I'm going to give you a chance to send me questions, and I'm hoping we can do this technically. Maybe Whitney can come back in and let me know if...
I'm here.
Okay. Can you send a question and see if it works?
Yeah, now I know Jen sent a question, so let me go over. I'm going to the left-hand side, and when I move my mouse over there, I see Q&A. It's the fourth bullet point down. Okay, so I see Jen's questions.
Okay, I see Jen's. Okay. Okay, when I see...
I'm not sure how I ask a question.
Okay. I think I can you... I'm going to answer one question now.
Yes.
Jen asked about the impact on the bone mineral density test if you have a fracture. What it does is, let's say L1, L2, L3 have a score of -2, and then L4 has a score of -1. In other words, there's a significantly higher T-score in that particular vertebrae. It's a false high score because of the compression fracture. So it doesn't mean that it's worse or better or anything. It's just false, and that's why they often take an average or take a close look if there's a big difference between the scoring of vertebrae that are right together. Okay, another question here is, when you say you have been on medication since 2002, do you mean a specific osteoporosis medication? If so, which one? What has your experience of these meds been like? Okay, I was on, to start with, I was on Fosamax and then Actonel. the bisphosphonates, and my BMD increased, and it was good. And at first I had no side effects. But after being on them a number of years, I'm guessing 5 to 7 years, I developed heartburn because they can be really hard on the esophagus.
Did you take Forteo?
Yes, from the bisphosphonates, I went to Forteo, which was the daily injection. Then you can be on that for a maximum of 2 years. From Forteo, then I went to Aclasta, which is the annual infusion of the bisphosphonate. And I did that because I didn't want to take them orally anymore because of the heartburn issues. And then from there, from Aclasta, we made the decision to go to Prolia. So of course, my concern is being on all these meds. I don't want to be on the meds. I asked for a drug holiday, and I cannot have a drug holiday because I'm still, you know, I had fractures before menopause, and now I'm, you know, once you've hit menopause, you're losing bone because of the lack of estrogen. So I'm still at risk for fracture.
It looks like Kim asked a question. She said, by a higher score, oh no, let me just see. Oh no, she was asking the question that Jen asked. I gotcha. So no, that's not a question there. But I did have a question. I was wondering if you would be able to post the links, like you had one for exercise, you had one for food nutrition. Can you post those links in the Facebook group? That way we can easily click on them and go see those sites.
Yes. Yes, I can do that. And I'll also send the link again too for the Canadian Osteoporosis Patient Network, that you can join that for free, because I think it's really worthwhile to go back and see some of the archived presentations there. One alone is on medications. Now those are medications improved in Canada. Now I can't remember, I don't think I mentioned, what was it, strontium?
Yes, that's been brought up a lot.
Strontium ranelate is not approved in Canada or the United States. It is approved in Europe. And why there was an issue at one point is they were concerned, I think, for older people, because it was not recommended for patients with heart or circulatory problems because it caused heart attack and blood stroke. Or sorry, heart attack and blood clots for older people. So, but Claire had a great post that explains the research behind it, and it's still considered the benefits outweigh the risks for various people, and probably younger people that are not at risk for heart attack or stroke. So, but I just wanted to share that it's not approved in Canada or the United States, but it is in Europe. And you'll find that with other medications that are coming down the pipe. I believe Amgen and others, you know, they're looking at ones that are not bisphosphonates. There will be other medications coming out. I don't know exactly when, because each country, the approval system and time frame is very different. And sometimes one country approves something over another. The other issue with strontium, that sometimes it can cause a false higher BMD reading because the strontium itself gets in the bone and the strontium is heavier. I've read that as well. That's in the research. But again, I invite you to read Claire's post because it was some great research.
Hey, Christine. So I've got a question about calcium. Have you heard, because my endocrinologist said it's not true as long as you don't take a high dose, but as far as taking calcium, have you heard that it could clog your arteries and that taking a plant-based form, like an algae form, would be better?
No, the only, it was in a number of medical journals, the issue with calcium is over supplementation. You can take calcium citrate, calcium carbonate, all of that. The idea is if you're taking a supplement, it's okay to take it. Do not take large quantities at one time. They're saying take 500 milligrams.
Okay. But I mean,
The ideal, though, is to get it through your diet. If you cannot get it through your diet, then supplement, and then do it sporadically throughout the day. Like, let's say your doctor agrees that you should be getting 1,000 milligrams. Don't take 1,000 milligrams at once, and separate it. Because what was happening is people were taking their multivitamin, which had elemental calcium in it. Then they were taking calcium pills, and then they might have calcium, you know, in other words, they were over supplementing to try to make sure that they had enough calcium in their system, right? And so that they took too much. They took too much at one time, and they may have already been at risk for heart attack or stroke, or they had circulatory issues.
Okay.
And there are some people like myself that, you know, I had 3 miscarriages, and through that process, when I finally found a specialist, I found out that I did have a prothrombin gene defect and antiphospholipid antibodies. I was at risk for a clot. So I had to go on a blood thinner at the time. So somebody like myself, it would not be a good idea to over supplement or have to do supplements versus getting it through nutrition.
Gotcha. It looks like Jen asked another question. Do you know the half-life of the different medications you have taken?
I'm not sure what that question means. Do you know what that means, Whitney?
I believe half-life is in reference to how long it stays in your body.
Oh, yes. Okay. They don't say exactly how long. Bisphosphonates, depending on which type of bisphosphonate, whether it's residronate or whatever, they do, again, and I know a number of people on the Facebook group that are trying to get pregnant again are concerned about bisphosphonates do stay in your body for a longer period of time. And that's why sometimes they allow you to go on a drug holiday after 5 to 7 years. The exact period of time, I do not know. But yes, bisphosphonates stay in for quite a long time. I think probably longer than Forteo or Prolia. But yes, they have long term, and some people are concerned about that. And I know that's an issue with people that want to have a second baby. So you have to talk to your healthcare team. And you know what? It's a gray area. It's not really black and white. It's a gray area.
Yeah, I know Forteo has a very short half-life. I want to say at one point I heard it was like an hour. That's why you have to take injections every day. But don't quote me on that because I'm not 100% sure. Christine, are you still there?
Yes, I am.
Okay, just wanted to make sure. I don't believe I have any other questions.
No, I don't see any others.
Let me just check Facebook, make sure nobody posted anything. Oh, Kim has a question. If you knew everything you know now about the medicine, would you have held off taking anything after fracturing or being diagnosed?
Oh my gosh, that's a tough question.
Yeah.
That's a very tough question because, yes, I just took the bisphosphonate. It was like, give it to me. You know, I didn't, Prolia wasn't out. I don't even know Forteo was out at the time. I didn't really have a lot of options. And so I just took what was given to me. And, you know, I didn't have a lot of options. I just knew in my heart I did not want to break another bone. I could not take breaking another bone. So I knew I had to do something. And that was really my only option. And, you know, if I went back, I'd probably do the same thing again. I'm at the stage now where I'm more concerned, you know, being on it for so long because I was young. You know, young in comparison to many of the people that go on these drugs. Now I'm more concerned, and I'm really looking forward to those other medications that do come out that are not bisphosphonates. You know, I think they need to look at something else to help people with osteoporosis. One other piece of research that is interesting for anybody that's had to be on a blood thinner it's interesting. My hematologist just recently came out with the research that women that, like myself, that were put on blood thinners to prevent, you know, a miscarriage because they were afraid, you know, or the risk of a blood clot during the pregnancy. They're now saying that that is not actually effective anymore. But, you know, who's going to take that risk? When I was 42 years old, I had 3 previous miscarriages. I wanted that pregnancy to be a good one. When somebody said, you know, take a blood thinner, it's like, absolutely. If that's going to prevent a miscarriage, you don't have any other alternatives, right? When somebody waves that in front of you, they're now saying that might not be the right route to go. But, you know, that's a difficult decision. You know, at 42, you can't keep having other pregnancies. Maybe at 25 you can, but you can't at 42. So it's a really tough decision. It's a very, very tough decision.
Christine, one thing that you said that really hit home for me is you really have to trust your body. You know, when I went to the chiropractor, and I know a lot of us did, when I went to the chiropractor and he was doing, you know, manual twisting adjustments, not even a week after I had fractured my back and had a baby, I remember thinking, this isn't right. And I'd come home, I would cry at the office. I'd come home, I'd be in so much pain. And I'd tell my husband, this just doesn't feel right. And my husband and my mom and the chiropractor, who none of them knew better, kept saying, no, it will get better. You know, this is the best for your body. You know, having a baby really takes it out on your back, that kind of stuff. And then now, I mean, like you said, you've gone to so many appointments in that first year. And I've seen 2 different endocrinologists. What I find interesting is they have conflicting ways of doing things. One told me calcium was really important, and I was so focused on my calcium, and my new endocrinologist is not at all focused on calcium. And so I think you do have to kind of do your own research. I'm really glad we have this group so we can take away experiences that we've had, because that is research in a sense. But yeah, you have to listen to your body, because I don't feel like the answer's out there for us.
No, it's not, particularly for a younger group, you know. Well, I think so. Hopefully people can look at the link and that it's archived somehow. Again, thank you to Whitney for help and Matthew for helping with the technology. I learned so much. I learned a lot in the group.
It was totally my husband. And thank you so much for presenting for us. It was very informative. I learned a lot. And I think the girls in this group can learn a lot from this. And I'm really glad you're speaking out, not just to us, but to everybody that you can. It's great to get the word out.
So everybody have a great weekend. Take care, and maybe we can do this again on another specific topic or something within all of this. It's hard to do. It's hard to cover all of this in an hour, you know.
Yes.
Thanks, everybody. Take care and have a good weekend.
All right, thanks.
Thanks,
Bye.
Whitney.